Hello everybody, in this video I'm going to talk about using reflections in your wildlife photography, so stick around. Well, welcome back to another video, and as you'll see it's an office-based video today. I'm not out in the field. To be quite honest, I've been struggling with a bit of inspiration during the summer months. It's not my favourite time of the year for photography, to be honest with you, and everything has been so dry in the UK. I think, as in many parts of Europe, over the last sort of couple of months, we've had no rain at all, which has left things very dry and unappealing, and a lot of the birds have finished breeding or coming to the end of their breeding cycle, so the plumage is a bit tatty, that sort of thing. So I've been struggling a little bit for some inspiration. I'm really looking forward to the autumn. Things are looking like they might turn a little bit. Some of the crops have now been harvested in the fields, which means that I can now see the hares and deer again properly. So maybe I'll make a few videos on that, and I do plan to do something on summer woodlands as well. Hopefully after we get just a little bit of rain, it might that would be good to freshen things up a little bit. But anyway, so reflections. Now when we think about reflections in wildlife photography, the first thing that springs to many people's minds is that sort of reflection pool, that garden reflection pool stuff that has been going around for a few years now, and produces some really good results. Now I'm not going to go into that here. There are plenty of videos on YouTube and plenty of stuff on the internet which sort of shows you how to do that and goes into that into a bit more detail. Now, what I really wanted to talk to you about today was something that inspires me in my photography, and that's using those sort of natural situations where you get reflections to enhance your wildlife photography and just give it another dimension, basically. Everybody knows by now that I love waterbirds, and I love photographing them, particularly in the winter. I just find them fascinating subjects. I never tire of it. And what better way to use reflections, obviously, than with waterbirds? So I'm going to concentrate on waterbirds today with a few of the examples that I'm going to show you. But these techniques and these examples can be used with other taxa groups as well. I mean, let's think about water plants, for example, or invertebrates such as dragonflies, or mammals coming to watering holes, that sort of thing. So you can use the sort of techniques and things that I'm going to discuss today with some of the images that I'm going to share, with those other things as well. It's, these videos are all about inspiring you to think about your photography, to take, if you take 2 or 3 things away from each of these videos that perhaps you can experiment with your own photography, that's the aim of it, basically. So let's have a look at a few example images, and I'll explain how and why I've used reflections to enhance the image. So let's start with this picture of a grey phalarope. Now this appeared, well, there were actually 2 of them appeared along with a Wilson's phalarope, which is a very rare bird for the UK, 2 or 3 years ago down on a lagoon, coastal lagoon in Hampshire. So I went down to photograph them. So the phalarope is a classic example of just using the reflection like a mirror and placing the bird in the upper half of the frame with the reflection in the lower half, so you've got that sort of 50-50 split. But actually adding interest also is it's swimming towards that plant on the left. The lighting was really nice, and without the reflection it's just a standard shot, but the reflection really adds something to it. And quite a lot of the time I've taken images like this where I haven't thought about the reflection so much, and I've ended up with a bit more space at the top and cutting the bird's head off in the bottom. And after a while you've sort of learned by reviewing some of those images, and you see this sort of situation unfolding in front of you, and I deliberately included the reflection here, but I waited until that bird was just about to cross behind that plant, because I knew that plant on the left hand side would add that bit of interest and sort of center the whole image. So, you know, this is one of those classic sort of mirror reflection type shots where you just place the bird in the upper half, the reflection in the lower half, and you've got that balance sort of midway in the frame. Looking at this image of a great white egret, the lighting wasn't brilliant. It was a bit harsh. It's getting on towards later on in the morning. This was actually taken in the summer. So this has gone past that sort of just post-dawn, really beautiful, warm light period, which actually disappears very, very quickly in the summer as the sun rises rapidly. Now, I couldn't get down to eye level with this bird in this particular instance, and you'll see some of the out of focus elements around the frame, which were reeds that were in front of me. So I was on a highish bank shooting through reeds, and I just used that elevation to my advantage to include, again, this, as with the phalarope, this sort of split halfway along the frame. So the bird's in the top half, the reflection is that mirror in the second half of the frame. It balances it nicely. But this is a good use of the sort of harsher light where I couldn't get any sort of atmospheric images that I like to take. So I looked at it in a different way, and I used the elevation to my advantage. That's the other thing about reflections. We all try and get to eye level, and whereas you can get reflections at eye level, you'll tend to find that they appear more elongated because of the angle. So if you're a little bit higher up, that's how you actually achieve this sort of 50-50 sort of mirror-like split. So use those situations to your advantage. Without the reflection, this image is nothing. With the reflection, at least there's some sort of interest, and I quite like, you know, the slight ripple to the surface of the water where it's wading through, and you've got a slight bit of breeze just disturbing that surface, just, you know, adding to the effect. Now the next image is an image of a mute swan, and this is a good example of what I was just talking about in terms of getting eye level with the bird, and see how those reflections have been elongated because of the angle. Now I'm quite a way away from this bird, and there's quite a bit of surface area, water surface area between me and it. So that means that this reflection has more room, and actually you'll see it goes all the way down to the bottom of the frame, and that bit of water would have been quite close to the lens, in fact. And this image is all about the reflection. You'll see it's not that sort of 50-50 mirror split like we've seen in the previous two images. This is this bird is in the top third of the frame, and I've given much more room to allow that reflection to gently sort of grade away from from being quite prominent where it's touching the bird, and it just slowly fades away into the bottom of the frame, but you can still see where the head is. And this is another situation actually where I'm using a low-key lighting effect. So obviously with the mute swan, it's a white bird, and I've got a background which is in shade, and the morning sunlight is just starting to hit the bird, so you can imagine the exposure differences between the white plumage of the bird, which the sun is hitting, and that area of shade behind it, which is reflected in the water in front of me, which is why we're getting this sort of high contrast in colour, or high contrast in exposure, should I say. So when you as a photographer get a little bit more experienced with exposure and how that works, then you can use these situations to your advantage. So not only are we looking at reflections here, but we're looking at a low-key effect, and this is achieved by dialing in probably, I would think, 3 maybe 4 stops of underexposure. So we're really underexposing this image to get that sort of black background, knowing that there'll still be plenty of details in those whites, and actually the reflection will still come out as well. So that's combining two techniques, and I'll do another video on high key and low key images another time. So with the next image, is very similar to the swan, similar technique, but here I've gone for a sort of, again, a 50-50 split. Because I'm slightly higher above the water here. I'm on a very low sort of embankment, basically, which means I couldn't get exactly eye level with the coot, but it doesn't need it because it hasn't got that long neck of the swan. And again, this is using very similar technique, early morning winter light, background in the shade, light just hitting the bird, underexposing. But this image is nothing without the reflection. It's all about the reflection. It's where that beak is almost touching the water. That's what makes this image. It's the angle of the head, it's the position of the beak, and it's the reflection in the water. And to show you the effect that dulling down that reflection would give, I'm going to show you the next slide, where I've deliberately taken the exposure level of the reflection down to basically mute the effect of it a little bit, and you'll see it's nowhere near as effective as that first image, where the reflection shows strongly. And I think the center composition really helps this, because it's balanced. You want that sort of 50-50 split. And again, as I said, low-key approach to this to make it minimalist. And as I said, I'll do a video on high-key and low-key images another time. Reflections for me are not just about the bird or the subject being reflected in the water. It's also about the backgrounds and how you can pick and choose your spot and position yourself in a certain way as to get a certain effect with a background reflecting in the water as well. And a good example of this is this image of tufted ducks, which I took earlier in the year. Now again, this is an elevated position. It's actually taken from a sort of pontoon which stretches out over the lake. So it gives you that elevated position. I can't get eye level in this situation, but this is taken with the sun behind me, which I don't tend to do a lot these days. I tend to sort of try and use side lighting or shoot into the light to create artistic effects, but it's just the way that this lake works and that particular vantage point works. But what it does do is the early morning sun shines on a willow tree on the opposite bank, and during the early spring, the bright greens of that early foliage reflect almost in this type golden type colour, which makes the surface of the lake turn into what I feel feels like liquid gold, which is what I've entitled this image. So I had to wait for these tufted ducks to drift in and out of that reflection, because either side you've got the sort of muddy greens and browns of the sort of normal pond type environment, and so there is only a small spot where this sort of reflection of the greens of the willow come through as a sort of golden light, which is the early morning sun, which is that sort of warm tone of the early morning sun hitting those greens. So look out for those things, because that can really produce some nice colours to your surrounding environments and to the subject you're taking. So keep an eye out for that. And another example of that is to keep your eyes open for textures and patterns that are reflected in the water. Again, you'll see this is actually a female tufted duck this time. This is actually on the same lake as the previous image, and I hadn't planned this photograph at all, but as I was walking past this bird, I noticed that the reflection of that early spring tree where it hadn't got much foliage on it, I just felt that the composition worked really, really well with the trunk sort of dividing the frame into two. Now a duck standing on its own with just a plain background, plain reflection, just wouldn't have been half the image. I just like the textures and patterns in this. So it's always a good idea to keep your eyes open for those sorts of things, and they can be really interesting when you use them in reflections in water. Now the next image is again taken on a local lake to me. And this is almost a natural reflection pool, because the lake, it suffers from, during the summer months, it suffers from a high degree of surface weed and algae growth, which basically chokes the whole place. But what they've done is they've put a boom across in certain areas to try and hold that weed growth back for where an inlet comes in, because they're all chalk stream fed lakes, which makes them very, very rich and very, very clear. Now, I took this in the middle of the day during the summer months when I was searching for some inspiration with birds. As I alluded to in the introduction, the summer isn't my favourite time of the year, and I always struggle with the sort of more artistic side of photography during the summer. But I needed to get out with a camera, and I thought, well, I've only got the opportunity to go out in the middle of the day. let's just see if I can use the sort of high cloud that we had. So it's quite bright, but the high cloud was diffusing the the harsh sunlight, so there was a much softer feel to it. And actually, the line of the boom, you can see there's a rope and some floats basically, which hold that weed back. And ducks and coots and those other sorts of water birds like to basically rest on the side of that, on the weed areas, where it all builds up behind that rope, so it's quite dense, and they can actually rest on on that divide. And what it does do is it creates these lovely reflections in the clear water just below them. And this image, there's no dramatic light, there's no mist, there's nothing atmospheric about it, but it works because of the reflection. And again, I'm using that 50-50 mirror type split with this, but I quite like the position of the float on the right hand side. It balances it quite nicely, adds a bit of interest, and I actually also like the detail you can see underneath the tail area of this mallard, which you don't often get to see. So that's why I quite like this image. I actually think it works quite well. Now again, the next image is another mallard, and no apologies for including common birds, because I think that you can use these common subjects to practice certain techniques and approaches. And this is another time where I've used, well, not low key this time, but obviously a high key approach to give a minimalist feel, and all the concentration then is on the bird and the reflection. And again, I'm at quite a high angle here because I'm on a bank, which I cannot get eye level with the bird. But what's happened is that I've chosen a reflection in the water of the high cloud above, so it's very, very bright, and by overexposing I can basically turn that reflected area into pure white, so to create this very, very high key image where all the concentration is on the duck itself and its reflection. And you can play around, and as the ducks are drifting around, you can use certain angles of the bird just to create a bit of interest and put them in different parts of the frame. But looking around for those sorts of opportunities, I think, even in the middle of the day, even during the summer months, getting out there and getting creative with your camera, it's possible, and this is what this sort of exercise is all about. So there we have it. There's just a few of the ways that I've used reflections in my own photography to add an extra element. As I said, this wasn't ever meant to be a how-to video. It's a video about inspiring you and giving you a few ideas as to how you might incorporate a few of these things in your own photography. So anyway, I hope you like the images. If you did, then please put some comments in the comments section below, or let me know how you've used reflections in your own photography perhaps. As I said, if you've liked the video, give it a thumbs up, that always helps. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, then please make sure you hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the bell icon for notifications of new videos. Anyway, I hope that's been really helpful and you've enjoyed the content, and I'll see you all again next time.